this is John. That's what he told me to say. But
Yeah.
I want to welcome everyone back to another SLAM seminar. As you know, the main purpose of SLAM, as we conceived it at least, was to get across ideas that were going on campus about academic analytics, but we thought it was important also to occasionally look off campus to bring in some exceptional examples of the application of analytics to student success. And our first off-campus visitor, Dr. John Campbell, is here to share some of that with us. He currently leads the research computing arm of ITAP, Information Technology at Purdue. At least I think that's what it means. I couldn't see it written out anywhere, but I was guessing that's probably what it was. He received 3 degrees from Purdue and still hasn't left, apparently. So that's a good thing.
Left a couple times, keep coming back.
A master's in educational computing and instructional design, and a PhD in higher ed administration. He's been a scholar in residence at EDUCAUSE and is a nationally and internationally recognized person doing academic analytics, winning a variety of impressive prizes and things like that. His topic for today is to talk about Signals, a project that they're doing at Purdue to recognize students early on and understand where they stand.
Great. Thanks, Tim. So, I think I have a loud enough voice where everyone can hear me. Are we okay? So I don't mind being interrupted. So feel free to ask questions anywhere throughout. Some of you noticed I changed my title and I was like, it just seemed odd when I was looking for in the back of like saying the past, current, and future application. I'm like, it's not the. There's lots of things going on with analytics, and it's a very exciting time for this kind of work. And as I visit others, I just learn more and more about other projects going on. So I may bring a different focus than many of you in the audience. So rather than being a faculty member at an institution, my first role is actually as an administrator of an IT group. So my group's responsible for interacting with faculty on the research side as well as teaching and learning. So when I started thinking about this project, it was around the time where IT was being challenged to reduce cost and to show a bigger impact on campus. So you kind of need to have that as a background piece as we talk about this. So, for me, it's how can IT bring strategic impact to scale? So as I look at services, I need to think about, okay, can this at least go to 10,000 students? You start playing around with things less than 10,000 students. Those are generally kind of the domain of departments and the colleges and schools on campus. So in the beginning, about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, there were a whole series of questions revolving around campus. Some of this came about because of the Spelman Commission looking at higher education. And so there were questions asking about, okay, what should or what could institutions be doing about student success? How do we get students to take advantage of the resources on campus? So there was a whole survey going on about how effectively was supplemental instruction and how many people were using the chemistry help desk and the physics help desk and the math help desk. All in kind of this budget cutting, the state's cutting back type of mode. What information can we look at to identify students at risk? And then ultimately, with talking with folks from student services, how can we make students more aware of where they are in classes and more aware of how they're doing and what's available? So I keep talking about, a model. And so as I've talked to groups, a lot of people are down at the bottom. They capture data, they report data, and then they stop. We do lots of capturing of data. There is more data on this campus than most people are aware, actually Tim and I were talking about lunch, about all this data that groups capture, and it never really goes beyond capturing the data, but we have it. More and more people are dealing with trying to use this data to predict. Even if you're looking at student success, you can go back 20 or 30 years where there were researchers using basic data to try to predict which students might be at risk. And they start looking at things about first-generation students and looking at, different academic preparation. Where I would like people to get is at the point of acting upon those predictions. So often when I talk about producing actionable intelligence. And that's very carefully picked words. It's like, okay, we're going to develop some intelligence about what's going on, but the whole intent is to act upon what we find. Otherwise, it doesn't do anybody any good. And then ultimately, you want to refine those actions and feed that back into the loop. Did it actually work? Most institutions, when they started looking at student success, they started going through almost a predictable path. You develop this watch list. From some type of program. It's a first generation. These are returning adult students. These are people returning from the military or whatever. And you put them into a program. You try to put them in similar types of classes. You're kind of moving them right along. And it's all based on, that list was identified essentially by the time you walked into campus, and there was an advisor or somebody that was just kind of watching and trying to help out. We're still trying to do that today. Then we upgraded. In some ways, we went to the faculty, trouble ticket. We asked the faculty members, okay, in your class of 500, who do you think's at risk? Send us a list, please. And we upgraded that list, and we went to Scantron. You could bubble, fill in the little holes in terms of, what students you thought were at risk, and you eventually turn that in. And then we upgraded to the web. You could actually do it on the web. Be much quicker, much better. And those things just really, for most people, collapsed under their own weight. Most faculty members do not have the time to, particularly if you're teaching a class of 500 students, which is not, uncommon for a freshman and sophomore. It's like all of a sudden you're expecting me to go through and identify, and they want this weekly. About 2 weeks in, it gets lost. It never happens. And then you end up in this stalemate. Faculty members don't want to be involved. Student services are upset at the faculty members because they never participate. And then it just kind of dies. Where we're trying to go with course signals, or where we've gone with course signals, is to say, okay, this watch list information, based on what the student comes in with, is a valuable piece of information. The challenge is, it never changes. So if you base it based on first generation students, well, you're always a first generation student. It doesn't change. So what information can we add to this mix that will provide kind of a real-time update of whether students are struggling or not? And the two pieces that we started out picking is the course management system, your course sites type of equivalent, to see whether students are engaged in the class, and looking at the electronic gradebook. And that would provide kind of more of a behavioral, what are the students doing to identify whether they're at risk. We also changed, rather than going to the academic advisor, our initial response went back to the instructor, the faculty member, and back to the student. In some ways, this is the birth and the challenge of academic analytics. So we have this data, then all of a sudden you start looking around for data. Well, you got lots of data. The tutoring centers have data. You can still look at the faculty referrals. You have all kinds of specialized tools, whether it's video conferencing, whether it's library materials. Then all of a sudden you start looking at student surveys, what some people want to do with class attendance. I have schools that are talking about doing chapel attendance. They know at their institution, if you start missing chapel, you're probably at risk. And it may seem kind of interesting for a large state school, but they got data to back that up. They really, so I mean, people look at chapel attendance. Then you may want to look at the portal, then you got social tools, and then all that classroom engagement. So you end up with this whole pile of possible data sources in which you can build predictive models from. And then ultimately you want to take an action upon that. You want to communicate the results to the student, to the instructor, to a staff member, like an advisor. Ultimately, you want to get this in some kind of data warehouse, data store, where you could actually keep building upon it. You're going to need some analytics reporting tools. And you got to get the communications and everything to feed back upon itself to see whether it works or not. This is the way I feel on campus. It's like, okay, how do you find the student at risk? Where's Waldo? Well, there he is. But when you have such a diversity on campus, how do you start picking these people out? There are lots of people that look similar, but how do you start looking at it? And in many ways, this is the way I kind of feel when I'm trying to build solutions to address this issue. So in terms of the catalyst, I was involved with working with some people from student services. They were talking about the faculty and how they never cooperate. And like, well, there's got to be a better way we can get more up-to-date information. And of course, everyone realizes asking the faculty to submit this from once a week to 3 times a week isn't going to be the answer. And I was in charge of the course management system. And I'm like, we got a whole database of stuff. What do you want to know? And they're like, well, can you tell whether they're actually engaged in the course or not? And so that really became the genesis of that. I became deeply interested in the aspects of student retention. And I've told some people here, I have a personal buy-in to this. I'm a first-generation college student. And as I look at things, I don't have a clue how I survived. I mean, somehow I managed to do it 3 times over. But it is a real interesting challenge.
Can you maybe say a little bit, you used the term at risk?
Yeah.
At risk of what? Because there are many potential failure modes.
Sure. We're largely interested at the course level in terms of identifying students at risk for failing the class. Now, why is that? Part of that was we have a lot more information on what's happening in the course than like the social integration aspect of students at risk. It's very hard to kind of get a sense of where do you go mine that data. It's not going to be easily obtained from Google or Facebook or something like that. So we're largely looking at the course level, trying to identify those students at risk. Because if you can make students successful at the course, success starts building success. It's not going to address all the issues with all students being at risk. But that's what. Thanks for the question. Tim.
Say something about when this began to happen. I want to get a sense of time.
So this began about 7 or 8 years ago. So we're looking at 2002, 2003, where this started building. 2007 is when we started rolling out some larger pilots. Pilots being more than one class. Our original approach is actually looking at 3 pots of data. So we look at the student's academic preparation. So this is all the information that comes from the SIS. all the stuff that the students submit to us for applications. What high school classes, what their standardized test scores, what the sub-scores are, all that fun stuff can be in there. We look at kind of their effort, and we look at how the students are participating in the course compared to other students in that class. So we don't make an attempt, and it's actually, I don't find it possible to scale, where we completely understand what every faculty member is doing in every class. Because we can't get to the point where we're customizing, well, physics does this, so we're going to build something on this, but someone else does it slightly differently. So we look at the effort and compare that data with the rest of the students in the class. So we kind of normalize that data. That makes one assumption that the faculty member treats all students equally in terms of what they provide. You get to individualized learning, that whole model leaves. And we also look at the gradebook data, so the performance data. So we take those 3 pots of data. There are some things that we don't pay attention to in terms of kind of the academic preparation. We've intentionally avoided ethnicity, gender. We're just trying to stay out of those conversations. We don't look at first generation. And that is more to steer the conversation on campus on those things that are most important, rather than getting into a philosophical debate about whether we ought to be looking at those or not. So we take those demographics, we combine that with the effort, student performance, and every week we generate a calculation that provides either a red, yellow, or green signal. So the red means stop and get help, yellow's caution you're falling behind, and green's keep on going. That signal is displayed both to the student as well as the faculty member. We do this on a weekly basis largely because of how the institution schedules classes. So we have a lot of classes that are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday, and faculty generally try to keep all their classes in sync. So by the end of the week, typically everybody has their assignments turned in and that kind of stuff. So when we look at the effort, it gives us a nice place to look at the effort and compare with other students in the class. With that signal, we provide a specific interventions on the web, as well as an email that goes to the students that makes suggestions on what they need to do. And essentially, it is almost like a mail merge type of property where the faculty member can kind of customize the message to the student. So they could fill in some of the data elements. The faculty member at that time could make suggestions saying, remember, help session for the next exam is on this date, this place, this time. It could suggest going to the SI. It could suggest coming seeing them in their office hours. Yep.
Does the green light mean that when I open this up and I see it, I don't really have to pay very close attention because I'm doing fine? And a red light means I should maybe look at the message and read it?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a green light, you're doing pretty well. Okay. And so a lot of people will just ignore it from there. If you've got a red light, you need to do something. And you need to do it now. And so clicking on the light will immediately kind of give you some guidance on what you should do.
So the light is intended at the student level to be a simple filter for them to decide.
Yes. And what we find in some of the focus groups and things that we've had is you ask a student about, well, how well are you doing in physics 300? And you get this kind of long, wishy-washy answer for a while. Yeah, I'm okay, kind of struggling. You ask them what color their stoplight is, they immediately tell you what it is. Oh, I got a red light. Well, you got a little bit more problem than doing your okay. A red light means you've got to do something. And so it's been very interesting. The students have generally taken very much to this. Yeah.
That's why only 3 years follow. How about students going so fast?
Yeah. So the question was, why just 3 colors? Why don't we differentiate it some more? If you go back behind some of the mathematics behind this, we actually kind of have a probability of success. that we intentionally don't share with anybody. We don't share with a faculty member. There's actually very few people that can actually get to that number. Because we don't want to change behaviors. You know, what would happen if you were a faculty member and said, well, Susie got a 20% chance of success in your class? Are you going to change? You know, most faculty don't want that kind of number at all. Red, yellow, or green is just fine. Most students don't, I mean, students would rather have that number in the focus groups, but we don't think that's a very, it's not a useful number, and part of it is if you start pushing at, you know, the models and the approaches that we use behind this, we're trying to get big buckets here. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get students to start using the services that we already have set up for them to be successful. Yes, ma'am.
So if you actually over a faculty member, if all of a sudden that class has friends, it might say there's something going on in the teaching.
Yeah. The faculty member actually has a gradebook view. That's the best way I could say, where it will show the students by rows and every week according by column. So they can actually take a very quick look and say red, 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 yellow, and they can see whether students are changing and stuff. They can see whether there's a whole bunch of people at red. That is not shared with anybody other than the faculty member. And that was kind of an intentional decision on our part. The system was not set up to be an evaluation of the faculty member. It was to be a tool. Yeah. Boy, I got a whole bunch of questions on that one.
Well, yeah, it's the same because it's technically in public domain, right? That could be perfect at some point.
It is all FERPA. It's student progress.
Right. So it's not grades though, right?
It is not grades. But we do consider this FERPA information.
But in terms of the faculty, the view of the faculty who has all reds, or 50% red and 50% yellow, that's faculty evaluation.
That can be faculty. It's not intended. Some people will interpret this as faculty evaluation. It's not. Yes. No doubt about it. Can I go to the person in the back and then I'll come back?
Do all faculty use a gradebook that we access, or do you have a mix of some people are using the gradebook, others are using other methods?
For our current program, we're all using the same gradebook. Now, it's just technically, can we add a different gradebook? Sure, we can add another gradebook. At this point, we got one gradebook. And the institution made a choice a few years ago saying, hey, we're supporting one gradebook. Faculty, you can do whatever you want. However, this one gradebook, you can automatically get all your grades imported into the student information system. One click, you can actually have all your grades submitted to the institution, but we're only doing one. And so that decision alone made many of the faculty go to the one gradebook. And that's a big help. It doesn't require faculty to use that one gradebook, but there's a big carrot at the end in terms of submission of grades. Yes?
I guess it's a clarification question because you were saying that the analysis is done at the course level.
Yes.
So is it possible that for the same course everybody gets a red light?
Well, it's always possible that they get a red light. Usually, if they all get a red light, there's something bigger going on. And chances are I've not seen that happen. Chances are it's something beyond the student's control if everybody get a red light. It means...
It's not normalized within the class.
No, so we don't do any distribution. The faculty could do a distribution in their grade book, which would impact the light. And so that's possible. But you know, the faculty members can't change the academic preparation, for example. That's going to stay stable for the entire semester. They can't really change the effort compared to the peers. Yeah?
When you do calculation, do you give the same rate to all the methods, or do you use a gradebook that is only for the others?
We do different weights, and we are experimenting now with changing weights based on different years. So we know, for example, the academic preparation is a nice, healthy chunk of the freshman. But that chunk evaporates by the time you hit the sophomore year. And so one of the reasons why we continue to focus on course-based models is it allows us to be more predictive for a smaller group of students. So one of the examples, the first class that we used this with was biology. And the faculty member we were interacting with says, I know where the problem is. They're terrible at math. And this is a lab-based course, and they just mess up their calculations. But they got to get these skills done because they can't. This is the gateway course for all biology majors. And lo and behold, we looked at all the math placement exam. They were dead on. So their model includes the math placement. An English course, well, math placement is probably not relevant. And so that's why we continue to go on course base. We started out doing a historical perspective, just doing some data mining to try to build certain models. And we just pulled almost 30,000 students' data and see what kind of models we can play with. And with the group I talked to earlier, you could spend a lifetime building models. There is so much data and so many possibilities. You could just continue to develop models. But in the end, you really need to boil it down to what's the essence and what's doable. Because you can kill yourself modeling different kinds of behavior. But we went out with a certain goal in mind. Our goal is not to understand all the complexity behind learning within a particular course. Our goal is to find students that are struggling. So more, large-scale buckets are fine for identifying those students. And that's been quite successful for us. So we were kind of moving right along, having a good time, and then all of a sudden we got a call that NBC was showing up in 3 days. They wanted to do a story on this, and somehow the message, the word got out, and they got all excited because they were doing special education stuff. And, it was neat, and it's a video. It's on the site for SLAM. There's the link. So go ahead, take a look at it. It's probably the best produced piece about what we're trying to do. But within 24 hours, we had over 300 institutions that all of a sudden wanted, me to come out and spend a week with them. Or can we just have your code? Or can we just do... It was really at that point where we started trying to understand how does this start, generalizing across other people. One of the people that was interested is a community college right across the river from us. And we're like, okay, yeah, we'll talk to you. It's real easy. We'll just meet over coffee or whatever. And then you start diving into this. It's like, well, they're an open access institution. They don't require any high school transcripts. They don't require any standardized test. If you have a pulse and dollars and interest, you can attend. And that's the whole one. That is the role of that institution. It's a very valuable role. But all of a sudden you take one of our little buckets about academic preparation, there's no data. And then you start dealing with, okay, what do you do trying to predict students at risk when all of a sudden you don't have a big pot of data that you've been relying on before? And so that ended up, and a couple people have asked earlier, ended up with us kind of packaging up signals, and we partnered with, in the end, with SunGuard Higher Education, where they took our existing model and they made it a production piece of code that could be used by multiple course management systems, multiple student information systems, and they're kind of marketing that material. It was, for us, a piece of being able to survive this experience. Because we would die under our own weight just trying to maintain kind of what we had at that point. And for us, that was absolutely an essential piece. With this license arrangement, we also preserve, though, being able to do new derivatives and explore new avenues of research and come up with other pieces of code that would hang off of it, or new pieces of code. So it really helped us because we were dying under the weight of lots of requests, people trying, and it was real, I mean, very legitimate types of requests. So where are we today? We have about 104 instructors. We have over 100 instructors utilizing it. 71 courses, 167 sections, 17,000 students. Our goal is in the upcoming year is to actually have the entire freshman and sophomore population with most of those courses using signals. So for us, 20,000 students. That's where we want to be in a year. We want to scale it to that rate. And we're primarily focused on the freshman and sophomore. Things change junior, senior year. Lots of smaller classes. Faculty members use tools differently. They don't use some tools. So the data gets a lot more interesting after the junior and senior year. But we're primarily focused on the freshman and sophomore year. And I'm pretty sure we'll hit the 20,000 students probably this coming fall. So fall of 2012 is where we'll be with 20,000 students all going at one time. Some snapshots. So one of the things the instructor sees when they log in, they'll see their class, they'll see the students, and they'll start seeing week by week, or whenever you run the interventions, you'll start seeing how students are performing. So you can kind of take a pretty quick look and say, well, all of a sudden this went from a red to a green, green to yellow, green to red. Something's going on there. And you have some better ideas. You like to see them continually type of improve. And it works as a pretty nice way of getting kind of a sense of where the class is, where the student is. They can also, for some strange reason, they see something and it's just not right. They can change that before it gets released to the students. So there's always cases where the model may take an exam into account an exam. Well, a student broke their leg or missed the exam for whatever reason. Well, if you're not careful, a student may not have that exam score in, so they can kind of look through and say, oh, this green to red. Well, maybe they're a student athlete and they didn't get an exam score in because they still got to make it up next week, whatever. And you can actually change the color of what's released. In terms of the faculty member, our philosophy is the faculty member is part of the process. This is not run auto-magically, and then the faculty member has to deal with the results at the end. So we provide kind of a catalog of suggested text. You could see some of, some things where you can have automatically filled in. And so the students will get a message in terms of, at high at risk. You can even differentiate if you want, if they have a high amount of effort or low amount of effort. It was one of the things that kind of has developed over time. Because you could see, because you would probably give a different amount of advice. If they're really at the top of their effort, but they're a red light, there's something more fundamental going on than the student that doesn't have a lot of effort. You'd have a very different message that you would put forth to the student. So the faculty members will actually, run the model. They can review what the model is. They can adjust what message they want to go out. And then in the end, they release the signals to the students. And that's the way we do it. We got people that argue both ways. Well, it should be automagic and all that fun stuff. This fits our campus culture. So general findings. It's interesting. We were able to change a lot of success within the course. But we also didn't change immediately the number of withdrawals. in the course. But the students had a tendency to withdraw much quicker. Now, for people that have, that remember their student days or an advisor or something, that actually means something because there's a certain date where you can withdraw without a grade and it doesn't count in your GPA. And after that date, it counts towards your GPA. This was a big thing for the students. They actually liked that quite a bit. The impact of signals really developed based on the faculty. We have a series on our website about best practices. After the NBC article, we started having department heads requiring faculty to do this, which was a disaster because the number of faculty started it but never really used it. And so we started developing some best practices. Oh, please, if you get anything out of this, this is not the magic pill. This does not cure all ills. It is meant to try to identify students at risk. It is not the ultimate cure-all. And I will re-emphasize, I believe faculty involvement is absolutely essential. We have talked to other institutions. I have been at a place where they didn't like our solution because they didn't trust their faculty to do this. And I'm like, I can't help you there. That's a different problem. And so they were like, well, can't, you just change the program where it happens on my, yeah, we could change it. It's actually not that big of a deal, but we're not. So fall of 2007 was our first very big sets of pilots where we started getting in multiple classes and such. And so these students just graduated in May. That would be their 4-year graduation. So the top row, so out of this freshman class, we had 1,500 students that were involved in the pilots. So the classes they were in, 1,500. So there's 5,000. We have about roughly 7,000 students, freshman students every year. You can look at the retention rate of those students year by year. So, so there's 7%. This is what we find most interesting right now, is our second year retention rate is where we see the biggest jump. And as we start, and we haven't completed our analysis, but our logical understanding is there's a whole bunch of services designed for freshman students, incoming students. There's a lot of people paying attention to the incoming freshmen. But after, once you start your second year, you're kind of like on your own. After 4 years, we're doing really well. And so if someone says, well, they're much smarter. You pick the smart classes. Just as one measure, looking at the SAT scores, we're almost 30 points below. So we actually did the opposite. We picked the classes that we knew students were struggling with the most. That wasn't our engineering calculus class. There's a lot of problems there, but that's not the classes where we have the biggest trouble with. So we're getting excited. Yes?
So the signal courses are done in the first and second year, right?
Primarily first and second years. And we see the retention carrying through the end. What we are finding in some of the focus groups is students are starting to gain good behaviors. So one of our initial releases was with biology, but we started hearing from our chemistry faculty members about students talking about what they learned in biology, that there is a help center, that there's things available to them. So they were starting to ask their chemistry faculty members about these resources. And so we're starting to see some of those trends.
So can I understand as the first year and the second year, they are still undergoing the intervention? And then the third year,
they're on their own. But they have a tendency to still, open that gap. This is not the world's most perfect analysis in showing this. We started out trying to develop cohorts of kind of matched students, and we kept falling, it fell apart, because every semester we ended up with more faculty adopting this. So all of a sudden the people we had in one cohort are no longer in a cohort, and then you start mixing and matching, and then we just gave up and said, okay, let's look at our students as they emit as we use that. Yeah?
I thought you had said that in the previous slide you were able to affect academic success but not retention, but here...
Well, within the course, so within, say, Bio 101, we didn't change the number of students that completed the course from any statistical variance. The number of people that dropped that course somewhere in the way was about the same. But they performed much better in the class. Now, as you look at the university retention, that performance starts building success that they're more likely to stick around the institution. And I can't claim, and I will never claim, that signals cause this. These are just correlational types of things because we don't have enough data and we don't have enough time to analyze to say X causes Y. Other interesting facts that we're diving into, the graduation rate. So you saw a much higher retention rate, but you see with these people with 2 or more signals classes, they're not graduating in 4 years.
That's the 4-year.
That's the 4-year graduation rate. What we found out is, yeah, the students are still on campus, but many of them have changed majors. So the 4-year numbers for people with the 2 or more signals don't look that great right now. We anticipate when we get the 5- and 6-year graduation rate, that's going to be looking up quite a bit. And it's a pretty small number. It's only a couple hundred at this point. Here's just an example from a biology course. You're looking at generally grades. You know, it's grades. What can I say? Generally, you start getting more A's and B's and C's. You get smaller D's and F's. Let's talk about the students, what they thought about it. 89% really have found a positive experience. About 3/4 of them thought they'd like it in every class. 60% thought they got a higher grade because of getting the information from signals. About 60% thought that they sought more help because of signals, which is kind of puzzling to us. But then you start asking a little bit more detailed questions, which doesn't seem, you got over 3/4 that believe that this affected their motivation, but it didn't help their grade. And so you start talking to students, it's like, okay, so what do you mean by that? And so they don't often see necessarily a direct correlation to the grade, but they do get that this is pushing them along. And so we're happy with that. We were always worried about Big Brother watching. We thought we were going to have a revolt with the students, front page of the campus newspaper. The students on campus are the biggest proponents for us. We've had a couple of students argue for long periods of time that our model is wrong, it's not predicting things accurately. Those 2 cases, the students actually failed the classes. But student responses, they like knowing, they appreciate the kind of the kick in the butt, as they put it. You know, you see these kind of comments again and again and again. We've had our biology faculty member take a different tact. She's kind of has a rough personality, and that's just. But if you don't respond to after like 4 of these messages, the 5th message is, I tried, you're not you're not listening, I'm not doing any more until you come see me. It's amazing the number of students that respond to that message, though. And sometimes it just kind of takes that type of edge to it. You know, The second one about students saying that the faculty member really cared, you talk to the students, they know this is a mail merge type of message. They know it. They'll tell you that. But they still feel a personal connection with the faculty member just by receiving it. And so we're actually kind of, it's an odd dynamic, but we do see it more and more. The students have criticisms. They want to see the exact number behind it. Oh, they do not like a 3-level signal. They want to know whether it's an 89 or a 90 because it's a difference between maybe a yellow light and a red light. And they like some of them would like an indication of why traffic lights don't change. So we've actually started changing something where the last light was released on this date. Because some of them were wondering whether it ever changed. They want more specific information. There's a few students that felt like they were notified too much. And there are a few students that felt demoralized. They didn't like continuing to receive a red light. And that's just the real part of it. Students, again, they felt like the instructor cared. They felt there was motivation. They liked the reinforcement. They liked the reminders where they can go get help. It was pretty consistent themes here. The faculty, they liked the interface overall. They liked the red, yellow, green. Most of the
complaints from colorblind faculty?
Not yet, but one of the reasons why we went back.
So you had little checks and things.
You have little checks and stuff was for that very reason.
Yeah. Thank you for the colorblind faculty.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that was one of the pieces that kind of came out one of our first. It was easy when you actually had the signal where you could kind of see which one was highlighted. Now when you start going this way, it wasn't that way. They like to be able to kind of see that overall view. Boy, the biggest criticism from faculty, they're always concerned whether they're setting the right criteria at the right level, and was it good enough, and that's sometimes hard to overcome. Is, we got to think about big buckets here. And we err on trying to get people that we think are going to get C's in classes because we want them to start using the facilities. They agonize sometimes at the messages that they send. Am I saying the right thing? Can I say it better? Some faculty do make mistakes, even with some of the recommendations. I had a physics faculty member the first week told all students with a red or yellow light to come see them. They were a lot more careful on how they understood while we had made certain recommendations. They were thrilled in one way, but they just had to come up with better mechanisms in terms of how to provide the support. Outstanding questions we're still doing work on. How do we get attention to students? How do we get to the point, or how do we avoid the point where this becomes spam? How do we word the message, and how do we change the wording over time? We started out and we had a pilot that we actually sent a different message when a student went from red to yellow, or yellow to green, or green to yellow, or yellow to red. And that just fell apart because it was not sustainable developing that many options and stuff. What's the best way? Do we try to text message the students? We tried that, and that was a miserable failure. What we heard back from the students was, hey, that's my own personal life, you stay out. We started out with having over 50% of the students wanting text messages. By the end of the semester, we had 4%. They're like, the web page is good enough. I know where to get it. And we know based on the logs, Saturday, students are on there looking for their signal. Other questions, how do we refine our predictions? Better take advantage. we have interest in doing more research on closing the loop and trying to identify the help-seeking behavior. So we make these recommendations, are they actually following them? If they're not following them, how do we build that back into the model? So that's coming up. There are some interesting studies going on internationally of what people are trying to do with analytics. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this for 20,000 students, because the approaches that some are taking are no way to be scalable. So I'm trying to figure that out. There's really interesting things going on with network analysis and how students interact with other students and what students end up kind of falling off to the side. Lots of research that will tell you that the students that fall off the side are really at risk. But I'm trying to figure out how to scale that and do this on a regular basis. Ultimately, my goal is real time for everything. How do we balance the course specific with the institutional needs? You can make a lot easier models institution-wide. They just don't work as well. Course, specific's going to take a lot more interaction with the faculty. And how do we work with other groups? And so we're doing real well with students, the faculty. We just now, with our engineering folks, they've just stepped up and said, we're going to take on the advising piece and how this can inform advisors. Getting the data to them is easy. It's work. But if you program, you know how to do it. It's just a matter of doing it. But working with all the advisors and helping them understand and figuring out what the best ways of doing this, it takes a lot of work. So our engineering folks have just stepped up with this. We have what I'll call other special programs. The Women in Science, Women in Engineering, the military support organization, all are wanting this kind of information, so we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. And athletics really wants this information. They're accountable for making sure, they get numbers all the time in terms of which students are going to graduate or not. Athletics really would like this kind of information.
You don't really have data on religious participation, right?
Do I? No. But do other schools? Yes. Oh, yeah, you look at some small, I have been to a couple institutions. There is a swipes card outside the chapel. They require participation. I mean, that's just their campus culture. So let's look at a few challenges here. There's a data challenge. I got people laughing. Man, this is just growing in terms of the type of data sets you could bring into this. The real interesting challenge is a lot of this data is no longer owned by the institution. All the publishers are doing WebAssign or some type of thing that with your textbook you get the secret little code, you go in, you do practice exercises and stuff, and you're no longer touching whatever campus might provide. And guess what? You have no access to any of that data. And so that's going to be difficult, and we're talking with several publishers about committing to opening up that data.
How are they receiving that?
Oh, go ahead.
Are publishers bound by FERPA the same way institutions are?
Yes. I mean, technically. But it is one area where the institution has very little control over what the publisher does. Because a faculty member, by adopting a textbook, that's as simple as it can be, all of a sudden now opens up all that data.
Maybe a quick follow-up. From your perspective, with all this data, do you feel like FERPA needs to be changed, or does it serve a valuable purpose, or is it any way of more productive learning?
Does it need to be changed? Boy, I would say the way that institutions and individuals interpret FERPA is what first has to be changed. We got some people that read the FERPA in a very strict way. Very, very strict. And we got others that are a lot more open that when it talks, so FERPA talks about, you have to have an educational need to have access to the data. I can show you people on my campus that will say that only means the faculty member, period. And not even the graduate students. And then I got other people saying, hey, that means the advisors, that means the people in these support services, it means the whole collection that are trying to further the educational progress of the student. Now, FERPA does, it talks about the educational need, the right to know that information. It doesn't get down to, specifically these people and only these people. It's a federal law. It's very broad. Most of the time, federal law is actually made specific by litigation. And so there hasn't been a huge number of litigation lawsuits, particularly at universities over this. But I think we have to look at how we're interpreting that.
I think when publishers, when students go into one of these online homework systems, they just sign a license.
They just waive the right. They say, okay.
The publisher now owns that data.
Yeah.
Students click a button on the first day. They don't read it, but they do.
It's just like how many times you read the software licenses. You just click OK. Facebook changes its terms. It's 58 screens on your iPhone. You just click OK and just let me go through. That's what's going on. Yeah.
How willing have the publishers been around sharing that data for these purposes, or at least exploring them?
They're open to dialogue at this point. It is just like journal articles. They think they're going to make a mint off of it, off the data. And that's where it's being very hesitant among a lot of publishers. They know that data has some value. They just haven't figured out how to extract it. And so for some, they're not very interested. Others are like, all right, let's talk about what. And so I'm trying to leverage, hey, I know how to make that data useful. Here's what you got to do.
Do the publishers have a whiff yet that it could be used to judge the quality of the textbook?
They're not that sophisticated. No, they're not that sophisticated. You have to deal with the issues of importing, exporting. Common identifiers is going to be a problem too. Because once you go to outside sites, most institutions are not going to share your ID or anything else, so you create a new ID. Well, even if you have the data, then you've got to match it back. And so you have that issue. Modeling analytics challenge. I'll stick by my course by course is the place to go. We have interest in people looking at data like from the learning communities. I have the secret, anytime I have a library in an audience, I put about, there's a lot of electronic reserves and stuff that could provide a perspective. The librarians usually go off screaming. They don't like doing that. We got to figure out a way to make these models learn off of themselves. That's a lot more. And I would argue our models are limited by our imagination. And you could spend a lifetime building models. But where I want you to focus your imagination is what's the end goal and what's the simplest way to getting an indicator. Our initial models had 40 different variables. We were doing all this fun statistics and everything else. And then you boil it down, and it's like, we could get almost all the way there just with 6. Talk a little bit about network analysis. So which one of these is not like the other? You got 2 students over here that aren't interacting at all with anybody else. Now, can we pull that data real time and make that part of our intervention? So looking at who's talking to whom and how that is going. You know, the 4 most important people in this group are these 4 right here. These are what's holding the whole class together. And even knowing that information could make you do something. I was talking at lunch. So you don't have to get overly complicated here. So Rhonda Leach from the University of New England in Australia is doing some basic analytics. Every week she posts this online. A smiley scale. But she has already found that something with students providing feedback, it only takes them a few seconds, that they can start identifying students that are at risk. Mainly from kind of the social integration aspect of it. And so they do follow-ups based on a smiley scale, which I thought was
Self-reported.
Self-reported. And so that just kind of brings me back to the reality where you just don't have to make this overly complicated. You could start small, build upon success. Messaging challenge. You know, I'm not sure email was always the single best way, but it's even becoming more challenging. You know, do we look at different icons or graphics, or how do we reach the students? For somebody that wants to look at how to provide feedback and different techniques, there's a whole new avenue of research in terms of taking what color signal and trying different ways of reaching the students to figure out what works, what doesn't. Reporting challenges. We're getting an infinite number of requests, people wanting to see summaries of this data, and how do you decide? Our first task is really the advisors. And so that's where we're going to focus. We get lots of requests for special messages. You know, can you take the color from this course and the color from that course, and if they're a student athlete, and then do this? And so how do we report that? How do we act upon that? And then we're getting other interest from faculty on trying to look at different ways. You know, our students, you know, what's the general trend? Is it up? Is it down? How can we make that information? Particularly when you start getting large classes of hundreds of students, when you start looking at that gradebook, it's hard to see a trend. Institutional challenge, data many places, owned by many people. And boy, do people feel ownership of that data. And so oftentimes you feel like you're doing a lot of work to get people on board.
I'm trying to, Tim McKay gave a telling talk sometime about how he predicted the grades in this class based on basically how they've stop me wrong, Tim, but how they've done other courses previously.
Yeah.
So these variables you're using to build your model are clearly not independent. How do you deal with that? How do you go beyond what Tim has done? How do you make it better than your model, building models?
My model for building models, I mean, right now we're doing course specific, but what we'd like to try to start doing is, can we look at a pattern and see whether it has an impact on other classes? So, you know, if you had physics 300 and this math class was a prerequisite, can you start putting that into the model? It's a question of time. We have a list of options here.
Part of what you said at the beginning is true, is that the main predictor, or the basic prediction is pretty simple. It shows up in a whole bunch of ways. It's pretty easy to tell that this is a student who's not likely to do great in this class.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to see it. So.
Well, and if we can get to and stay at the level of, okay, generally, you know, are they at risk? Are they not at risk? Our goal is still to get the information to the faculty member, get the student to the faculty, get it to the help center, because they're going to be much better able to diagnose where things are really going south. Is it because, you know, on the exam they just missed all kinds of problems in one area? Is it, you know, attendance? Is it whatever? I'm not sure, well, I'm sure somewhere down the road you could develop a sophisticated enough approach to try to build the intelligent tutor that they have been trying to build since the 1960s. We're just not there yet. You had a question.
I can see why you would get pushback to this, and I'm just curious, and it's definitely one of the sessions for the students, but did faculty ever use it as a formative assessment of their instruction, and if they see a lot of red, they maybe know they need to go back and teach something or teach their instruction?
I am not aware of anyone that's said, well, oh, based on this, I've changed the way I've taught. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. We've had faculty change their approach actually more by writing the messages, because they're starting to look at things and saying, okay, what am I going to do differently this week to help the students move on? And then they start asking questions about, do we put practice exams up? Do we do other things? So we see more kind of, the formative when they're writing the messages. It's not to say that someone hasn't looked at this and seen a whole bunch of red and asked questions. I'm just not aware of anybody that has come up and said, and it actually would take probably a pretty brave, kind or confident individual to come up and say, oh, I saw a whole bunch of red in my signals and I changed this.
Do you see that much red?
I don't look. I don't look until after the fact. When we look at some of the overall analysis, we'll start pulling that stuff out, but I try to be real respectful that the class is the faculty's domain. Now, if they want help, we got all kinds of ways that we can offer help. But I don't, it's just like the same thing where we get department heads and deans that have asked, can I look? I'm like, no. Well, I need to look. And I'm like, you can go take it up with the provost. And I'm sure we can, come up with a process. But right now the provost is like, no, this is a project. It's still experimental. We're still learning from it. The intent is to improve student success. It's not to change the faculty. Right now I got that support, so that's great. So that's where we are.
What's been the effect of student thinking? Are you seeing more students wanting to take classes at that signal? Are you seeing increases in tutoring centers?
We're seeing big jumps in the tutoring centers. They're all excited because some of them were on kind of the chopping block for budget cuts and are no longer being cut. We see students demanding of faculty that they start adopting this tool because we don't force anybody to adopt this tool. We see, our students are our biggest advocates for this, really. And so that's been great.
Did you advertise in the course directory whether it was a signal set or not?
We've been asked by students to do that. We haven't done that. Our goal really is to get all the big enrollment courses freshman, sophomore, so we're going to try to tackle it that way. And I think we're going to be successful. We're not getting a lot of faculty pushback saying, I don't want to do this, with the exception of one department, which has been difficult with lots of other things. But that's, most faculty are pretty willing to try it out. Ultimately, I want to focus on putting the action behind the intelligence. I want to, try to keep focusing on that. And then I'm going to leave you with one question. Let's assume our models are all nice and good and very predictive and everything else. So what's the obligation of doing anything about it? And that obligation can be looked at from the institution. So is the institution obligated to put more money in these help centers or whatever? From the faculty to change their teaching behaviors? And ultimately, what's the obligation of the student to, given the feedback, to do something? That is probably the most interesting question that we have. These models are possible. They're very doable, but what does it mean in the end? I'm going to put a plug in. If you have a lot of interest, there's a Learning Analytics Conference. The second year it's going to be held. It's going to be in University of British Columbia in April, May. Beautiful place to be. By all means, consider attending. Submission of proposals is still open for a couple more weeks. And you know how to get a hold of me. And this will be all posted. So with that, are there other questions or?
Let's thank John first.
Oh, okay.